Good, we're on. So everybody, welcome to the regular meeting of the Conservation Commission Enforcement, January 14th, 2026. We have Sam is unable to be here tonight, so I will be the acting chair. And that means that both Oliver and Talia, definitely you guys are voting because we also don't have Stuart, and we also don't have Alice, right? Right. So there's no microphones but we have to speak up words. We're pretty well.
It's probably a good idea. They changed these lights in the ceiling, but want to speak up a little bit more just because you have the heat on. That'd be great.
Okay, great. So the first order of business is election of officers, and Sam did indicate that she would be willing to be chair again. I'm willing to be vice chair, but I also don't want to avoid somebody that wants to come forward at some point. Feeling comfortable about doing that at all. Because eventually it would be nice to have somebody at some point that might want to be vice chair and then chair or something like that. So I'm fine with doing it now. I enjoy it, but so I think
I'm gonna make a motion that Sam Collins remains our chair and Barbara McMahon is our vice chair. Unless others have other. Yes.
Second the motion.
That would.
yeah, you can yell at any other chairs. Oh, discussion.
Sounds great.
You guys are doing a great job.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate your efforts. Good leaders for this commission, so.
I want to say I think we've got so it's really the new members are awesome. Everybody been here is awesome. I would say the same. So okay, so actually, vote in favor, opposed. Do you want to vote too? I'll go for yes. Oh. So the next order of business is the approval of the December 10th, 2025 meeting minutes.
Well, does anybody have any corrections? I will make a motion that we accept the December 10, 2025 meeting as presented.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? And opposed to your abstain? Okay, I don't think so that's 5-1.
Yeah.
Or 5-0. And the next order of business is the wetland condition use permit applications, new business, and add motion to.
I will make a motion to request postponement of the wetland conditional use permit for 50 Clough Drive. And with that, the State Wetland Bureau application dredge and fill for the same address as requested by the applicant to the February 11th meeting.
Second.
Discussion?
Why they postponed it? Do we know? Devin on the sidewalk said that they're doing some minor adjustments with the fence alignment and I think some small adjustments with the ground structure. Came up, so they're gonna have to change all the impact them.
All those in favor? Opposed? Next item is 33 Northwick Avenue.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Akers. I'm with Catalyst Design Group, and we're a civil engineering firm based in Nashville, Tennessee, where the corporate office of HCA, who owns the facility, is located. and here to represent the project that they're proposing. A small, I guess, small canopy for an ambulance to back up underneath, as well as widening a garage door that's been there for many, many years. Want to make it same size as the one immediately adjacent to it. And with that, as you can see on the screen there, we had this drawing here. If you zoom out just a little bit, it'll show all the different conditions, existing conditions, and demolition, and proposed layout, and how the storm drainage is going to connect. So there are some existing, we call them foundation plantings along the brick of the building, some shrubs, basically. We're going to take a few of those out. And also we're going to slide over some existing granite curb to make room for that wider garage door. And underneath the new canopy, we're going to provide just about an extra 5 feet of sidewalk so that the ambulance can back up and have, I guess, room to maneuver a stretcher underneath the covering. And they'll turn and go into the existing double doors that are located directly to the plane north. That's the demolition plan there, kind of shows the sidewalk that's going to come out in a couple of the shrubs. And maybe slide to the left a little bit. That's probably the best one to see. There you go. And this is the layout plan. So if you zoom in, the darker hatching is the new sidewalk. We have some dimensions there. Yeah. And the little circles you see are the actual support columns. They'll have a foundation beneath the ground, which is why we're actually taking up the existing sidewalk we don't want to leave just a little bit of patchwork. We want to make sure it's a nice, clean, smooth sidewalk for the stretcher wheels not to be tripped upon. So the circles there are the proposed columns that support the structure above, and the thicker dashed line is the limits of the canopy above. So currently it's just all open. Ambulances can pull forward or back up to that small 5-foot sidewalk that's just not wide enough. So the facility would like us to, that's why we're coming before you to kind of show this drawing here. On that thicker dashed blue line, that is the limits of the wetland buffer based on the survey we had prepared previously. So this project's in it and just a little bit out of it, as you can tell by the limits of that dashed blue line. So that's, and we showed a dimension from the lighter gray color. That's kind of some pavement replacement we're proposing, just because we're going to take up the curb. We don't again want to leave jagged edges. We want to have a nice smooth pavement edge up against that new granite curb. And it's estimated to be roughly 2 feet off of that. The contractor will maybe do better than that, only be 12 inches off. But right now we're being conservative, showing a 2 foot offset. And that little bit of asphalt patch is only like 80 square feet. It's a very, very small amount. But we do show a distance there. From that to the wetland buffer, going east and west across the page there. So it's about 74 feet. But most of the disturbance will be a bit further away, just along the border there. I know there are a few questions, one regarding drainage. So this will be a canopy. I guess if you guys went to the site visit, just on the other side of this garage entrance is an existing canopy we did just a few years ago. And that has support columns. And down one of those support columns will be a downspout and gutter system that will continue directly below ground and connect via a downspout connection, which we have a detail for out of these drawings. So it'll be a subsurface connection via PVC pipe to the existing pipe. And that grading and drainage plan it does show that in like a bright blue color for that new pipe. And we have some labels there kind of talking about what that is. There you go. It says connect new canopy downspout to existing. And we have a detail on the detail page that shows how that physically connects. So hopefully that helps provide a little more information regarding that physical connection. It will be subsurface. The idea is, especially in the winter months, is not to have all that splashing on to the surface and have people trip and slide and that sort of thing, kind of safety thing. And there is an existing subsurface pipe running east and west across the page, and that's been there since the old garage was put in probably 30 years ago. And it discharges directly to the swale that runs around the facility. I'm going to go to the detail sheet. I think that's part of this package. Maybe one page up. There you go. There's right there, downspout connector. So it's one of our pretty common details, connecting a rectangular or square downspout into a round pipe below. It's got couplings and adapters and that sort of thing.
Anything else?
I think that's about it. Nothing too crazy. Just want to provide a little bit better experience for some patients to be covered and than weather.
Site visit's really helpful too.
Oh, okay.
The blue line is the 100-foot buffer.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And again, it's an interesting facility, you know, it's been there for many, many years, and some of the building itself is actually the buffer, so it's kind of hard to avoid any improvements on the side of the campus. They're going to have some sort of impact. So it's kind of why we're before you today. But much less impact compared to projects we've done over the past 6 years. You remember those?
It's an interesting property too, because there's like wetlands all over the place.
If you look at the city's wetland map, there's wetlands everywhere. It's like an island, basically,
Well, and so that blue line, right, is relative to, I guess, the wetland that's.
around the perimeter of the site. It's just basically, the way I understand this, these were man-made swales and ditches many years ago, and then they were taken to be considered wetlands and that sort of thing. So they were originally man-made, and I have a little thing on my desk. It's kind of funny. I've got a little kid's pole that says a back in a duck lid, and then it says lots of wetland now, so you can't swim when you look at your pole. So it's just how things happen sometimes. It's an imaginary line in space, but again, this has been here for at least 30 years, I would say. The garage entrance and the ED expansion, that sort of thing were done, I think, in the late 90s, I believe. And this is just something that's touching the area that happens to be on the opposite side of the line that we need it to be.
Yeah, but I mean, so that line is relative to a wetland.
Plain east, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, because there's also a wetland on the left too. That looks like it's maybe even closer.
No, that's all building to the left. If you want to, trying to think, let me look here and see if I have those.
It's swale that goes all the way to that.
That's along the front, and we're not anywhere near the front of the site.
Yeah, so that's what it's looked on this.
Yeah, this is, south, to make this readable, south is going.
Okay.
South is going north, and I hate to do that, but we had to match the architect's drawings. Yeah. That's a pet peeve of mine, but we like to match the architect's drawings.
So where you're putting the river rock, I know in the areas already that are currently there are plantings.
There's a couple of
Are
shrubs
there
there.
plantings that are gonna go back into?
We can certainly put those back, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we consider those kind of foundation plantings,
Yeah,
just to hide the height of the building a little bit to help dress it up a little. So we can certainly add some landscaping back, and that's not straight.
yeah, and helps with water and all that, those people, so that'd be great.
My question too, whether there's any like mitigation planned for.
Not a whole lot of room to do much. I didn't really want to put plantings along what I call the loop drive around the back, because usually when you're out there, you saw there was snow piled up there. That's where they push snow. So not the best place to probably put plantings. There's a very, very narrow shoulder between the edge of pavement and then going down the side slope down to the swale. So that's probably not the best place, in my opinion, just because they're probably gonna get torn up with snow piles and other things. We can offer some landscaping between our new sidewalk and closer to the building. There's like a long grass area there. We can add some additional plantings there if that would help.
I think that was discussed on the sidewalk, they had talked about.
Right, yeah, Caleb with architect, with JS Architect, he did mention that, so we
Yeah.
can certainly offer that. So we can have some landscaping, that little pink area, as well as the white area between the hatching of the sidewalk and the building. And instead of having grass, we'll have all just be a natural little landscape area. We can certainly do that.
Thanks, wishes.
Yes.
Just along those lines too, well, Kate, did you decide that like they need to have some sort of enhancement plan or?
Well, so in our zoning ordinance, it's required that if an application comes in that increases the overall net impervious surface.
Right.
You're required to provide a wetland enhancement plan.
Mhm.
And usually when we see those come in, that could be anything that's like extra landscaping that kind of offsets
Right.
impacts or the square footage,
Mhm.
impervious.
Sure.
Stormwater treatment or things like that. Those are probably the most popular ones we see.
Right.
So I think if plantings would be a great way to offset that, if you can kind of
Sure.
calculate the square footage of those plantings.
Okay.
Because I think is it 28 square feet that's extra or 90?
I believe as far as I think it was 240, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's right.
240. 730 square feet. We got.
Because, okay, I guess the disturbance is 240, I guess.
Yeah.
You go back and look.
Yeah, I think with the and I do recall when
Yes.
when we were doing the box culvert project out here last year. It's 2024. One of the conditions was no snow storage along the bank. I don't know if signs were put up for that, or
I'm not aware of any, so I'm not aware of that.
I might be.
Or if it was just localized to where that
Where the
work was happening.
was, maybe that's what it was.
So that could be another
Just
good
make it,
enhancement effort.
you guys said plantings along. That big.
There, just let it grow up.
That much is no.
Especially if there was another place where snow could be stored.
Would that be just along this short little area, I guess, here? Is that what we're thinking? It's the limits of the improvements of the sidewalk. It's, not very long distance. So is that what we're talking about?
So we should double check though, because I do agree that at least along that little area where the crossing is, a little bit wet, yeah.
Yeah.
What, do you mind if I ask, what color are you where was it located?
Where the new access way went in for trucks back behind the building, where the box culvert went in to replace the two failing. Radio culverts. I can tell you.
So you're going back to the project we did, I guess, 5 years ago, I guess, if I remember right.
It might have been one year ago. But. Right, it's much harder. I'm counting them up. Access road that Unitil uses. Back further behind the helipad. Back here is where the box culvert went in.
Oh, okay. Not aware of any of that. Okay.
Was last summer or last spring, we might have worked with a local wetland scientist on that project, and I think Trip Duncus.
Okay.
But I can double check to see if there was any snow storage requirements.
That's the strip that you're talking about, gate right there. If they just store.
I don't know about where snow storage would go.
Right.
But where is it currently?
I don't, just from the photos I've seen, they just, looks like maybe they were just pushing along the narrow shoulder of the drive, at least in the area of our project. That's from the photos I've seen.
Where else do they go? I mean,
Go off site or to the parking lots across the street?
Now, that's something we have to give the facility and ask them what their plan is and what it currently is, and if there any potential modifications. So you zoom in that picture, you see those two red ambulances parked where our project is? So that's they were talking about. So if we did anything on opposite side of that drive, that's what I was asking for. What
Yeah.
length up and down would you want that plantings to be done? Just the length of that sidewalk where the two ambulances are, or so.
One thing we often ask for is kind of installing some markers, protected wetland resource, there's a standard little marker that the city sells. And so for the box culvert projects we asked for was that they post that in a couple different places, right along kind of the edge of pavement, really kind of like where it transitions from pavement to kind of natural space.
And the markers to say, what does it say? It says,
It's standard language. I think it's like protected wetland
oh,
resource,
protect.
something like that. And it also sort of serves as a reminder to kind of, not mow beyond that point, ideally not push the plows beyond that point.
I thought that was like a snow storage sign or something.
That's for.
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I was here for this, so that would have been that in the last 2 years. But I don't remember exactly. I just have an image of in my mind of like the sign.
That could be a relatively kind of low cost way to kind of offer a little
Yep.
water quality improvement. If it did allow you to let that area kind of grow up a little bit.
When I was out there, I was back there towards the end of November. It was pretty grown up there, if I remember right. I got pictures there. So except for again, right along the shoulder edge of the pavement.
So
So we're talking about the plantings that Jess mentioned, the little area that you're taking out plantings and replacing,
Yes, right there, yes, ma'am.
and then more plantings over by the buffer
On the left.
on the left.
And that's what I was asking you, is like, what kind of linear footage? Are we just gonna do the length of the width of the two spaces, or you're not asking us to go from the helipad all the way down to Northwood Garden? Seems to be a pretty excessive length just for a little small project.
Yeah. Probably more applicable to where the drainage could possibly end up there, although most of it's being owned.
We could go from the nose of the island, it's just on this one here on the southwest corner of the ambulance area. Maybe move your hands straight up. We could actually go down a little bit with the nose of that, keep going down and a little bit up. Right there, we could go from there and go down. I guess we can go from that limit between the two islands, basically. We could put that along the drive. We could do that.
Yeah, like from there to the helipad pad or something.
I don't get too close to helipad because of rotor wash. We don't want things flying around. That's kind of a safety thing. So
Right.
if you see the island that separates the white arrow and the red ambulance, if you can imagine that going straight down, we could just put it along that width between that island and the other island along the buffer. We could do that. Kind of like the project limits, basically.
Often what we see is people contributing in a way that matches whatever increased disturbance.
Right, exactly. That's the same linear footage. That's what I'm saying. It should be like
Yeah.
before. Yes, ma'am.
So, and then for the rest of it, I know you have no storage issues, but, there is a lot of mowing going on between the that area in between, so.
Okay.
Oh my God. Connected. If there's an opportunity to let that grow up, a lot of it,
Well, sure, we can. We're at facility garden. Then just
and,
Is that a place where you would have the placards even?
Is that the place where we did?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But we're sort of only looking for placards, right, in the area that's being
project.
and in the placards where we had the approval before for the culvert.
Yeah, I think when the box culvert came, we didn't, extend placards all the way. Swing bench. Maybe we do just restrict it to sort of corner of the ambulance area.
It seems like, I know this is maybe a broader discussion, but when we have like small residents come to us, we don't just like put placards right where they're doing a project. If they had even, like 0.25, like a quarter of an acre, we would have them put placards around the entirety of their buffer. So obviously this is a small project in the scale of the ownership of this property, but it's definitely something to consider when we're like seeing things like this come up. Now this is the second time in a few years where we're maybe putting placards up. I wonder what the real financial burden would even be to ask them to put placards around all the buffers. I don't know. I'm just questioning it. Maybe that's a too heavy of a thing to ask, but it crosses my mind.
I was just curious where you were talking about the no longer mowing.
The whole, the area, the whole,
That whole far side of the, got it.
Like up towards the helipad.
and putting placards all the way around is, I think, pretty reasonable. They're just little placards.
is there like a detail I could share with the facility or?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Okay.
And then they know where not to mow too.
Right. And you wouldn't want to mow over that anyway because you could mess your mower.
Right.
Is there a certain, so many on center, like are they 10 feet apart, 20 feet apart? So
We usually,
city standing?
we do 30 or
Usually do 50.
50, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just depends on the site.
The question about the surface is gonna be all impervious surface?
Well, the concrete is will be standard concrete pavement, which is impervious. And we do show just a little bit of, like I said, roughly 80 square feet of just some patchwork of asphalt because we are going to pick up some granite curb and reshape it. We don't have jagged edges. We are showing just a small amount of asphalt to be replaced back to show a nice smooth transition. That's probably like 80 square feet. Ambulance tires and that sort of thing don't really work well with coarse pavement. The life cycle won't be there. It's just going to be ambulances pulling out of the garage, backing up. So it's probably the best place for coarse pavement. And that again is just an estimate. The contractor may come in and say, "Oh, I only need to do 6 inches off of this," and it's drastically reduced. We're just trying to be conservative, get something in the budget to show them.
Questions?
One thing that came up, with staff, and I already kind of discussed this first before the meeting, is that, we've internally had some issues with this swale out there and the pond next door, which is in front of Liberty Mutual. There's 2 big ponds. So this swale kind of goes around the back of the hospital and drains across the street to prime wetland and then to the west to the Liberty Mutual ponds. And so those Liberty Mutual ponds have historically been backing up in recent years and getting pretty high due to all the sediment in this swale. So we have been asking and working with the hospital and their owner to get it dredged for maintenance, just to clear it out and bring it to its original grade. Just this section between the pretty much the ambulance kind of the helipad and where it meets Northwick Avenue. So just to do a one-time maintenance dredge, and then in the future, if maintenance dredging needs to occur, they're kind of responsible for that. We have some easement language that we're working already with the hospital on this, but we just kind of want to double down as a city, make sure that this work gets done. So we've discussed possibility of putting a condition onto this that has to do with the dredging. And that condition, if we recommend approval, would be that all necessary dredging and maintenance work for the channel on site shall be completed by the applicant and approved by the City of Portsmouth Department of Public Works as a condition prior to the issuance of a building permit for this canopy project. I don't know if anyone's curious about that or wants to ask any more questions, or if you support it, don't support it. Just something that as staff and realize this is kind of prime opportunity to make sure it gets done. And you discussed it with that.
Right, and I was explaining to her, I'm here presenting a local project directly with the facility. The one she's speaking of is with the corporate who owns the facility, 2 different funding mechanisms, different folks. So I was just saying that it may be difficult or something like that for such a small little project to be tied together. Like I was saying, I'm pretty confident HCA is going to honor whatever the city's requesting them to do, but this is a local facility project. So corporate doesn't really have much to do with that, with this at this point. So if we tie them together, it kind of mixes a lot of things together, and it would certainly delay this, because if you're asking for all that to be completed prior to getting a building permit for this, then who knows, that could be 6 months. I still don't know. So I was telling her, I think the goal is once we get past this planning board, getting the city staff on administrative review and approval, they would probably want to start this work this spring, as early as we can.
Can you just clarify why that wouldn't be part of the local facility project, whether it was attached to this or not, and why it's more of a
Just-
corporate?
I guess we're working with the local architect who's working with the facility, and corporate does things with a certain dollar amount and higher. The larger projects we came through, I guess a few years ago, those were corporate projects. They have different times, different design teams, everything's just different. So that's why we're working with the local facility and the local architect to kind of help them with this project. It is ultimately the same owner.
Right.
But when you get into the details, there's different staff, there's different pocketbooks, everything's just different. So, but if you guys want to try and combine it together, we can certainly work with Trip and see if we get things done quicker than later. So, regarding the other project.
I got another question for Kate about that. So has the city asked the hospital to do this at an earlier date, and when was that?
I think it's just been a little slow going. So during the box culvert project, we actually attached a stipulation back then that they would work on an easement with the city to make sure that they're responsible for dredging. And then if dredging doesn't occur, the city will dredge it if necessary, and then the hospital will be responsible for funding that work. So that's kind of the easement language that hasn't been finalized yet. But I think it's just gotten to the point where it's so full of sediment now that it's kind of like we need to get it dredged soon. So I think this initial big dredge that would hopefully come soon would be the responsibility of the hospital, and then on, if the hospital can't maintain it after this big dredge, then the city will step in and build a hospital for dredging. But it seems-
Would you mind showing on the screen where exactly you said there's a limit between the helipad and going to Warford Base? Was that piece you're speaking of?
Yeah, so the last time we talked to the HCA representative trip,
Mhm.
we kind of finalized with Department of Public Works that the area that really is kind of holding the most amount of sediment is between the helipad and Borthwick.
Okay.
So back here, it's not as bad. The grading is kind of close to what the original levels are.
Mhm.
But back here is where the sediment is coming back up. And so
Gotcha.
it's
So like right in conjunction with where new impacts would come with this project too.
right. So it's pretty, yeah.
And are you asking for the ponds in front of Liberty, which is a completely different ownership, to also be dredged by HCA or?
No,
Okay, yeah, so I was like, whoa.
No, yeah, I think when Public Works talked with the hospital engineers, they kind of determined that just doing this maintenance dredging would help
Gotcha.
solve a lot of the problems of overfill and going into this fine monthly too.
Because bringing in another party, different corporate, that's a whole different level.
Oh, yeah.
of headaches. You can imagine, okay.
Yeah.
But the city doesn't have the capacity to dredge it between now and here.
I doubt it. It's really on the hospital too, but it's like in case of emergency, something's backing up and overflowing and people are getting flooded, the city will step in then. Which later on. But
If
it's,
you didn't have the capacity, that might be like a slightly expedited road.
yeah, I'm sure they would
Just a
contact.
dollar guy, it's not, you know, it's trying to plan the work and all that.
When, if this like went all smoothly, when would this hypothetically be complete, this project?
Like I said, if they can start the spring, it shouldn't take this long. I think it'll be taking like a month or so to do this work. So I would assume start the spring and be finished by summer. I would just assume. I believe they've got the money to do to this particular piece. Funding boards.
Doesn't seem like it ought to be might get the urgency, in my opinion. But if wanted to prompt them to move along while we have their attention, could be a stipulation that says that they need to respond with some sort of initial plan or something, but something that won't hold up this particular work.
Yeah, I hear that. I think the one issue that we have as staff is that we have had plans in place and they just kind of sat on them. We did get a plan to us over the summer that showed the final dredging and final they call it elevations that we wanted in the channel, and it just hasn't been.
I mean, full spring to me is like May, like that's like 4 months away. But you're saying like the dredging could happen within 6 months potentially? If someone, or I don't know, I mean,
I think the hope, at least for Public Works, is to get it done as soon as possible, if not yesterday.
it's hard for me to believe that it couldn't happen within even like a few months of each other, I guess. I don't know, maybe I'm really lost on that, but what's waiting 2 months?
Is there a window that can dredge? Dredge?
It's a good question.
It can be.
Complicated. Wetlands permit that they.
So they wouldn't need a city permit for dredging. Maintaining a swale.
But they need to get the.
They may need to get the DES. Which might send them back to.
Which might, yeah, it might have been a little bit of a barrier before.
They have to come back before us for the dredging work.
No, if it was a PBN or a standard dredge and fill, they would, just as a state permit, but not for any city permits. Not for, sorry. Sorry,
Not for what?
not for a city permit, city what,
Not for a city, just the.
state.
Could it just be that they have to schedule the work and like show a plan of it and a date when it's going to happen?
within a certain time frame from starting this work on this project, so that it's like tied to it, but not stopping the project. So everyone knows it's going to happen, but also it's not like making this project slow down.
That could be a possibility.
That's why I was wondering if there's some way to make the conditions so there's like some simultaneous stuff happening, so if we don't totally stop this project, but we're ensuring that piece is moving forward as well.
Yeah, there is the option, and this, we went through a few iterations of staff, but, so this would be a condition prior to getting the building permit for the canopy, but we also, as enforcement, our land use compliance planner can do conditions precedent to getting a building permit or precedent to getting a certificate of completion or a certificate of occupancy, which is usually with residential homes, but if the hospital was looking for a certificate of completion of ambulance work and it was dependent on the fact that they dredge channel, then technically they wouldn't be able to get sign off on the final ambulance. Like they could build it, get inspectors out to inspect it, but I believe with the certificate of completion, they have to get final inspections done after dredging occurred. We did a condition precedent, which would at least give them a couple more months to go through the permitting, get the building permit, and actually build it.
It would hold them up from using it.
I think it would hold them up from using it if they don't have the
I
certificate
would
of
think so.
completion.
I'll have to check with the building department, but I think it would hold them up, but we at least give them another month or two.
And I'm wondering if this could be something that the planning board deals with rather than us. Is that more complicated or less complicated? Gives you another week.
Yeah, I can.
Can I weigh in?
Yes, you can.
Good.
The planning board dealt with it. It was part of site review a long time ago. So it's an ongoing issue that hasn't been dealt with by the hospital, nothing on these guys, but, so the idea here is to move them along so this project actually happens, because the Public Works is concerned about the flooding that's occurring. And that this, while it might hold up this project, it probably won't, because they need this project and we need this project. So, the idea is that if this project has they're required to do the dredging, then they'll have to do the dredging. It's not like it's a huge undertaking.
What I'm saying though is like, could it just be part of the planning board? Could they,
There's no
ones that
planning board approval here.
for this at all?
Just a,
So they don't even, they won't.
well, they will for the conditional use.
Yeah, so they say.
You can, everything you do is a recommendation to the planning board. The planning board can decide not to do it. But our recommendation was to send it through. It won't go through site review again. That's what you're talking about. It's just this permit. Are you saying, you mean the conditional use permit, the planning board?
Yeah,
Oh. Yeah,
because
they ultimately, they decide. So
They
you guys
decide,
make
so
a
they
recommendation
could-
to them.
for them to explore the option or something like that, but. So, without committing, without having quite.
Yeah, and gonna have, or request the public works representative to be there to kind of explain the urgency of the condition. And planning board meeting.
Yeah, and give you time to kind of.
Research it.
Time,
I give corporate.
another week.
It's possible they have the budget already set aside. If they have this agreement with the city in place.
And if you had a recent conversation, maybe there's some areas that you didn't know about. Want to make it more complicated.
Well, if it's gonna go to the planning board, maybe we can tweak that condition to somehow say in the same language about prior to issuance of the building permit. Pending planning board approval or just kind of link it. We don't even have to because it's going to the planning board and they'll be looking at it and deciding whether to approve or deny our conditions. But we could also add a stipulation saying Public Works representative shall attend the planning board hearing on this project to explain the condition. That's not way.
Yeah, I feel like that's a little vague. I mean, I personally, I feel like I would be okay with that being a stipulation. Dependent on their certificate of completion. I feel like that inherently gives them more time and it doesn't necessarily totally stop this project, but it also kind of pushes the issue of getting this work done and that kind of, it sounds like it's just in the weeds, excuse the pun, for the last however long, so for me personally, that seems reasonable. I don't know how you feel, but that feels reasonable to give you some extra time that way to.
Right.
kind
And
of-
they'll certainly want to construct this and not have it sit there and not be usable because they have something they can use today. And why would they not be able to? They would want to get it all taken care of.
Yeah, but I would hope that might give you a little bit more leeway to work in corporate and kind of get the ball rolling on that piece. And because, you know, it's already been sort of noted that with this new project, it is going to impact the runoff that's going into that swale right across the street. So they are a bit linked here in that regard. So that does seem like a reason. Stipulation from where I sit. I don't know how other.
It would make sense to, if dredging is going to occur, to dredge and not have that new landscaping that you guys are asking to be installed, do that after it's dredged. Otherwise, it's just going to get taken right back out.
Exactly.
Get equipment in there. So
Yeah.
there's a sequence of events that needs to occur.
When Kate was the last stipulation to them that they haven't responded to, when was that approximately?
So the last stipulation was about working on an easement with Steve Watson. And I think they're back and forth in drafting, but they haven't signed the easement yet. And that was with the box culvert, wetland conditional use permit, state permit that I think that was last summer, or last fall, 2024. So it's been about a year and a half.
I just feel like it's irresponsible to allow a project to happen when it could impact the neighboring property without like taking responsibility for what might impact them. So maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that's kind of why I feel like it would make a lot of sense to, before the certificate of completion was issued for the dredging to be complete. But that's
They find.
how I'm reading it.
Yes, close. So.
Yeah.
So I will make a motion that we recommend approval for the conditional use permit for 33 Borthwick Ave. With the following stipulations that the applicant have a planting plan for the small river rock area along the granite curb. The area between the new sidewalk and the building with some bushes and landscaping. That there's some sort of review or note of snow storage and signs and what the plan is for that. That wetland markers are installed along the edge of the wetland or along the edge of the road there, about 50 feet apart. That there is no longer mowing along the opposite side of the road. And that the stipulation that the city made about the dredging of the swale, but that it being completed upon certificate of completion and not acquiring the building permit to begin with.
Prior to the issuance.
Certificate of completion, yeah. And I don't know, do commissioners want Public Works rep to be present at planning board to kind of discuss this, so the planning board has more information that was discussed?
I think that makes sense, but I don't.
Make that a condition
Make it a recommendation.
for a recommendation?
Recommend.
Yeah.
Second one was. And no, No snow storage?
Yeah, I think review what this current snow storage is and signs to post where snow is not to be too stored or something.
Yeah. Well,
There's a specific location for the no storage? No storage.
To be honest, I don't know. I wrote that down based on discussion of other commissioners, but I wasn't entirely clear where it was an issue. I didn't notice there per se. So if any other commissioners have thoughts about where they should go exactly, I mean, obviously we don't want snow piled up at the edge of the wetland, but
So where the wetland markers are going. So if the wetland markers are going all the way around. Storage signs all the way around it.
seems like a lot.
Seems like the only place logically snow storage would be in that zone would be like, I don't know if you pull up the map, it's almost like there's like a little bump out from the pavement away from the wetland, and then like just below it, there's like more pavement. It seems like if you zoom way in right near where the like right down from the grass of the helipad, like right. See what I mean? Like, and just below it, like there, I don't know. When we were there, I don't recall any snow storage, but it seems like that would be the only place in that zone that snow would maybe be put. But I don't know. But I know you had mentioned like there are requirements of what can and can't be near the helipad, so maybe there's
Right.
no storage.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Might not, it might be.
And I would like to clarify these markers. So we talked about from Northwick all the way to basically the helipad. Are you wanting things north of the helipad as well? There's parking lot there, obviously. So hopefully people aren't doing anything. We're talking about going all the way around the entire perimeter of the campus.
To just beyond the culvert crossing, I think. I don't know if we have anything in between, but this length for,
To me, it would make sense to do that length because there's been projects kind of incorporating both of those areas. And maybe, yeah, I don't know, at least that I would suggest, but
Should already be around the box call.
Yeah.
That's the stipulation, so it's. Seems reasonable that when somebody's coming before us for an application, we should hold them accountable to the things that they promised to do in a prior application. Which is a matter of just checking.
because it might already be there. Yeah. Second.
or more questions on the. Any questions?
And you'll send out a formal letter with those. I'm writing them down.
Yeah.
To make sure, okay.
To clarify the snow storage again, so. Do we want to include a sign or just a sign for the area south of the helipad? Or just have the next iteration of plans going to the planning board, the areas that do have snow storage? For both. Or have plans know where there currently is snow storage, once we figure that out. And then also ask for signs. That was what we do.
I mean, maybe in relation to this project, what the plan is for snow storage in that area where the ambulances are coming, and then. You know, if it were to, for me, if you're moving it somewhere away entirely, then it doesn't seem like an issue, but if it's getting pushed across the street, then I would want to see a different plan for that, so.
Okay, we'll identify what's occurring now with the plan as it's being.
Yeah.
Go from there.
Yeah.
I think.
Us.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're able to find the existing snow storage location plan. And you can compile it and send it to the staff. We'll look at it and see if there's anything maybe along the edge of that swale or within 25 feet that is concerning, and then that you submit alternative locations to the planning board.
Okay.
So we got, I think countable, but, so planting plan for the area with the river rock and in between the new sidewalk and the building. Then are we also including plantings along that edge?
Yeah, across the street.
Okay, that yellow line.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 collecting areas. Wetland boundary markers along the edge of the swale every 50 feet between the box culvert location and Borthwick Avenue. No mowing along the road, and I assume that means the kind of left edge of the road.
Yeah, I think kind of where those plantings will be anyway, so hopefully.
And that could be the no bump plans.
Yeah.
Okay. And the markers should help with that.
Mm-hmm.
The city stipulation prior to certificate of completion. And then finally a stipulation of the snow storage plan. Finally, a stipulation recommending public works staff be available to present at the planning board meeting to explain condition number blah, blah, blah. And no more discussion? Any more? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you. Good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the state wetlands application. That is no impact of south of Goose Bay Drive.
Got it last year. Just had it.
Oh, did I? Okay, perfect.
My name's Nicole Martin. I'm a certified wetland scientist with VHB. I'm here today representing Lonza Biologics, who is the applicant for this project. This project is occurring on land owned by the Pease Development Authority, so they're also actively involved in this project. The application went through their board for approval prior to us going to DES. And this project, kind of spinning off your discussion from the last presenter, this is a city recommended dredge that we're following through on, as well as a PDA recommended dredge that Lonza is helping with. So the intent of this meeting is just to give you guys an overview of the project, review the proposed jurisdictional impacts, and the environmental screenings that we did as part of the wetlands plan application. And then just answer any comments or questions you guys may have about the project to help facilitate a smooth DES approval. You go to the next slide, please. Just to orient you a bit to the project location, this site is located between the International Airport to the west and Route 4 or the Spalding Turnpike to the east, north of Interstate 95. At a closer scale, this portion of the stream follows Goose Bay Drive and Corporate Drive. So this is just an aerial image of the project area. The approximate work limits are sketched in the red outline, and the blue arrows just show the direction of stream flow. This project proposes a maintenance dredge of this portion of Hodgson Brook to restore the hydraulic capacity of the stream by removing accumulated sediment that happens over time in this reach, and to reduce flooding on Goose Bay Drive. This project area was previously dredged in 2011 and it was permitted through DES.
So this work is within the exact footprint of the previous maintenance dredge. So because it was previously permitted, and we're just doing the exact same thing, we were able to submit a minimum impact wetlands permit application to DES despite about 8,000 square feet of proposed jurisdictional impact. And another noteworthy thing, so at the southern end of this project area, the culvert that conveys the stream under Goose Bay Drive, there are three 30-inch CMP pipes with concrete head walls on either side. And then the culvert that conveys the stream under Corporate Drive on the northern end is a concrete box culvert. We're not proposing to do anything to that infrastructure, so we're retaining existing culverts as is. But the box culvert does have about a foot sediment accumulation that we will be cleaning out along with the dredge. This just shows the natural resources that were delineated in the project area. They're delineated in June of 2025. So we have the Hodgson Brook Stream. The wetland 1 is a big emergent meadow. That's the large wetland that you see there. And wetland 3 is a scrub shrub wetland just north of Port Red Drive. So these are the resources that we're going to be impacting. Go to the next slide. Thank you. Here's some photos of the stream to give you an idea of what we're talking about. The photo on the left is a view upstream of the brook, and you can actually see some of the sediment accumulation just in that photo. And you can see Goose Bay Drive in the background. And then the photo on the right is a downstream view of the stream facing Corporate Drive. And this is just a photo of each of the wetlands, just to give you an idea of what they look like. So we have on the left, the big emergent wet meadow wetland. And then on the right, we have a representative photo of that scrub shrub wetland on the other side of Corporate Drive. So the proposed work will maintain the existing stream channel alignment while dredging the accumulated sediment. The proposed dredging will happen in 2 separate phases, as shown with the red and orange boxes on the plans shot below. The work will occur in drought conditions behind a cofferdam with the stream diverting with a bypass flume. So having the work occur in those 2 separate phases helps better isolate the work areas. The dredging will follow the channel dimensions from the 2011 application, which is about 4 feet wide by 2 feet deep, along with removing, as I said before, the foot of sediment that's accumulated in the box culvert under Corporate. Additionally, there are energy dissipation features, sometimes referred to as plunge pools, that will be constructed at the outlets of both of the culverts. The purpose of those features is to dissipate the energy of high velocity stream flows to prevent both localized scour in those locations, as well as slow the water moving downstream to minimize the chances of downstream erosion that could contribute to further sediment accumulation in this reach of the stream that we know is prone to accumulating sediment. The dredged material will be disposed of at an off-site location approximately a mile, a little bit less than a mile away, on land that is also owned by PDA. Here we have screenshots of the wetland impact plan and the legend at the top, that pink grid hatching just shows the permanent bed impacts, which is the main area of the dredging. And then along it, excuse me, we just have a little fringe of wetland impacts just for construction feasibility and access and that kind of thing. The total impacts for this project are approximately 8,000 square feet. But as I said before, it was a minimum impact because it's a pretty stretch. And then just some general project considerations to go over. This project will be permitted through DES's standard dredging fill wetlands permit application, and we'll get federal approval from the Army Corps general permit. We submitted a data check request letter to the DES Ecological Reviews, formerly DHB, and they came up with those 3 plant species potentially occurring in the vicinity of our project. On further coordination, we determined that only the great burreed and smooth black sedge have the potential to occur within the habitat surrounding this work. So they requested that a rare plant survey be conducted in advance of construction. So that's scheduled for late June to early July timeframe. The IPEC species list identified the longing bat and tricolor bat. We already got a dull effect determination using the IPEC determination key because although we will be clearing some shrubs in that scrub shrub wetlands north of Corporate Drive to construct that plunge pool, we won't be clearing any trees that are potentially suitable backwards. And the monarch butterfly also came up on that letter, but no consultation available at this time for that proposed species. but the site does not overlap with a critical habitat. And, excuse me, we're currently working on the request for project review for cultural resources to submit to the historical resources. But again, consistent with the 2011 application, we're expecting a no historic properties affected determination on that review. A few other things that might be worth noting is there are no priority resource areas for this project, no FEMA mapped floodplains or floodways, and no New Hampshire Fish and Game wildlife action plan ranked habitats. So it's, you know, it's within the development of the PDA property, so it's pretty straightforward. And with that, I can open it up to any comments or questions you guys may have on this work.
Question? I just have a clarification. I heard you just say, but just to be clear, you said for those flooding pools, you are gonna have to remove some shrubs, but no trees. Are you gonna have to remove any trees for the project? or-
I don't believe there are any trees. Our plan has, you know, like the surveyed tree line, that they do that for any woody vegetation. And our wetland scientists classified that wetland as scrub shrub, so no trees.
The sponge pools, I mean, it sounds like you're keeping with the original design, right? And the shape, the channel and dimensions. The plunge pools were also part of the prior design.
I believe the plunge pools are new. Yeah, they weren't constructed into this.
Curious when this like rivers were designed or these drainage paths. Was the expectation that they would need to be dredged periodically, or was this a little bit of a surprise or?
I'm not sure. I know that this is definitely not a natural stream alignment.
Right.
About 50 years ago, when the Air Force Base was developed, or part of the Air Force Base, they, you know, straightened these streams to fit within the context of the development. And when you, excuse me, when you look at the aerial north of Goose Bay Drive, the stream is very curvy. Streamworks recently, I don't know how recently, a couple of years ago, did a stream restoration on that portion of the stream, which is why it has that very exaggerated meandering shape.
Right.
Previously, it was just as straight as the portion that we're doing. So I'm not sure if it was intended to be that way, possibly because there was a lot of development surrounding it historically and currently, but I'm not sure.
Was that discussed? Doing more? Fine, for this.
That's not proposed right now. We're just addressing the city request and the flooding issues. We're just scooping it out maybe in the future. The stream restoration would be possible.
Yeah, it's just. Assuming it's all.
Good question.
Yeah.
I do have a couple backup slides for answering questions. Kate, if you don't mind just flipping through a couple. I have one addressing.
Towards the end.
Yeah, it's after the comments and questions. So we had one of our site investigation or remediation experts do a review of this project for us and prepare the application. Let's go forward again. There we go. So section 2.5 of our application narrative, which I think you guys all have a digital copy, goes into a little bit of detail of our desktop review of this project. But you know, it's just the NHD is one-stop database. But most notable, as you said, PFAS and also PFOS. Pease Air Force Base Superfund site. Residual contamination may be present within this project area, but it's located outside of the active zone of remediation. The 2011 application did one sediment sample. We weren't able to determine exactly where that sample occurred based on the level of detail provided in their application, but we saw laboratory testing results. And the results were below the DES soil remediation standards. So we're not too concerned about the level of contamination that we may encounter in the soils. But we're also not proposing to put them anywhere sensitive. We're disposing of them like land owned by PDA, not the applicant.
I was wondering about what this was. Like, whether you had to take any special considerations to dispose of it on a snug pad as opposed to just upland area. It sounds like it's.
I think it's piling it up in upland area, and Pease has been using this property they're proposing for other developments, and DES has accepted it before, so it's just piling.
That's right. Talking about the storage area.
Sediment, yeah.
So it's right at the jump. You see the jump.
The next slide, actually, Kate, I think goes into it. There we go. The proposed disposal. So you can see an aerial view from near map on the right, and then just a Google Maps street view on the left. They've been using this property frequently And on the near map image, it's hard to see in that view. There's still fence that goes around the entire length of the property.
I have a question about that, because I walked by it the other day. There's no BMPs there, and so, I mean, the way you're transporting it to, and I think that's because everything's stabilized right now, but
No BMPs at the property or with the
Yes,
disposal
storage
site? The storage area, okay. Is it currently being used or is it clear? Because they will stockpile things for construction and
stockpile.
remove. There were stockpiles there. Okay.
by that, what do you do? Or sediment there.
I can check with PDA. Just given the near map images, I thought they kind of maintained the erosion controls, but if they don't, I can check with them to see if they planned.
I mean, because everything is pretty good right now. So,
Right.
but,
Okay. Check with them.
so as far as the maintenance goes for the. So is there 2011 a long time to go? So what is the plan for the future? I mean, two parts to this. One is there anything to be done to limit the amount of sediment now? Seems like there was a lot of construction done with the right
Right.
across the street there and everything going on at Lonza. So is there something to do to make it so you don't have to do this as often? And also, was there any plan to come in and do like more regular maintenance to avoid this larger kind of project?
Yeah, there's another great question. I do have another backup slide pertinent to that specific question. Yes, we have an operations and maintenance plan that we incorporated into the wetlands permit application to address that exact topic. That's another also reason for energy dissipation structures, those punch pools at the outlet to both of those culverts. That is a new feature that wasn't proposed in 2011. We're hoping that slowing the flow of the water into those plunge pools will help reduce sediment accumulation in that leaching stream. And with this O&M plan, what PDA was hoping DES would approve is routine dredging of those constructed plunge pools without subsequent permitting. So we'll see how DES responds to that, but they're hoping they can contain the sediment in those pools that won't get into the rest of the stream and they can minimize future impacts and dredging of like what we're currently proposing. And they're also, wetland 1 is routinely mowed. So they're hoping they can establish a 25-foot no mow buffer along that wetland by the current tenants to further protect runoff coming into the stream.
Yeah, and this one is the one over by Lonza, they go across the street.
Over by Lonza,
Okay,
it's that big of wet, like emergent meadow.
okay. Question, and also across the street, they seem to mow too.
Not in our project area because there's a bunch of mature shrubs over there, so they're not mowing.
Yeah,
That's
more
measured.
closer.
And they already got tenant buy-in for this, so they're gonna establish that buffer and install signs along it.
Yeah, we need to have it across the street too. Probably. Yeah, on
Across the street, like on the other side of corporate, or are you talking Goose Bay?
Yeah, the side of Goose Bay.
Sorry, Goose Bay.
Like on the other side of the. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's where the buffer's proposed.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I think. Okay.
25 feet off of that, so the tenant can't get too close to the street when they're doing routine mowing. So maybe that filter will prevent other sediment from coming in, although I'm not sure if sediment sources come from that direction, probably coming the other way.
It's 15 years between trenching and wolf's type of aquatic feature. It's just you think you contributed to the level of what's going on.
I mean, that's a better question for our water resource engineers, but I can take a stab at answering. I think it's probably a combination of the surrounding development, also the stream channel, it was artificially straightened. It doesn't have like the natural meandering flows where sediment would deposit in the bends. It doesn't have, the shrubs, the dense natural riparian buffer that natural streams have. Slow water velocity flows. So A combination of the historic straightening and the surrounding development probably contribute to the rate of sediment accumulation in this reach.
Yeah, I think. Well, since the city kind of helped push along this project, so we went out there with, Chris and I went out there with, Lonza and DES and, someone from the PDA to talk about this and to get it going. And so I think we're really invested in it, and so is our Public Works Department. So if there's a possibility for us as like the planning staff to be copied on all maintenance reports and any correspondence about the maintenance going forward. I think that would be good just to give us kind of like those regular stormwater monitoring reports that we usually get CC on for lawns and things like that. Just get updates on how the maintenance work is going, the buffer is being planted or not mowed and progress reports. I think that'd be good one.
Sure, yeah, I'll definitely convey that to you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, going to the state, so. I think with 60 Pleasant Point, we made a similar condition to the state, so I don't see why.
Anybody want to make a motion? I will make a motion that we recommend approval for the State Weapon Bureau application for south of Goose Bay Drive minimum impact with the following stipulations: that there be a check on the erosion control measures of the storage site about where the sediment's going to be placed, just considering any contaminants that might be in it. And that the city be copied on maintenance reports. Is that enough language, Kate, or is there anything? Or
I'll second.
Seeing the maintenance plan, but you're adding kind of a no mow buffer,
Yeah,
like all along this stretch here, right?
yeah,
25 foot.
I try to do the best to prevent this from happening again. All the bad functionals. Right.
I mean, you can also, it looks like there's room to extend that.
To extend.
Beyond 25 feet, you'll have more space than that area. That could help.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's with other business. Thank you. Okay, is there any other business before that other business?
I think I mentioned this to you, Kate. So I sit on the steering committee for the master plan, and there's a draft that's getting ready to become out to the public. But I didn't know if this commission wanted to have a conversation or spend a little time at some point just discussing any priorities that they would want expressed in master plan that I can pass along. Priorities for, I think so. Something to put in there. I'm sorry, probably should have brought it up sooner, but the draft's something out, so it's also a good time.
You do that after the draft is released, or?
We could do it prior. The steering committee will be meeting again next month. We're currently trying to work on figuring out a date and time. So if there are ideas or thoughts that people have that they want me to bring to that next, that's part of every discussion that we have, is sort of you know, the members of the committee's perception about what priorities are in the city and where the things that we are engaged with, what we're hearing from fellow community members, so I can present things to them at that time, or there's also a whole website devoted to the master plan that has a couple of surveys and things that you can do, so you can also go and comment directly there and kind of get a look and idea about what's already happened and some of the public engagement that's already happened, and but so far I will tell you, last time the consultant told us we have about 2.6% of our population that's participated, which in their eyes was like a good significant number. It felt low to me because I think it was less than 600 people or something. But also one of the statistics they gave us was that I think like 84% of the people who have engaged to this point are retired. So I think it's really important to try to get families and younger members of the community engaged in what they want to see their city look like for the next 10 years. So, yeah. So things that I'm happy to back.
Even if we have a little extra time today and take care of everything else, but then spend the last, whatever, 15 minutes just brainstorming a little bit with you. I mean, it seems like an awesome opportunity to have you be that conduit for us. You know, that seems more meaningful than doing the survey. And I'm excited to do both, but
That's why I bring it up.
yeah.
Right.
Talking about doing that, when are you talking about doing?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's sooner the better. We actually want to influence the process. They're this
And we
close to
might
having a
have time
draft.
for the next meeting, like I said.
Yeah.
The consultant just sent out a Google poll. I haven't even looked at it yet about when to meet next month, so it might be next month's conservation session. I don't know. You're also all free to email me if anything comes up, you know, as you think about it further, but yeah, if we have a few minutes at the end to discuss it and
Yeah, for Jess.
I hear you. I study, do it as a group. And also to review the draft.
yeah, or I'll be, yeah, actually.
Okay, anything else?
I'll talk about the Ruth Street document letter.
Oh, yes. I sent them out because I haven't been home since I got.
Oh, yeah, I emailed everybody the request for more information from DES on an application we saw last month for the docks over on the North Home Fund. And
Which does that mean they didn't get our stuff? Because that's what it sounded like in the letter.
no, I think the opposite. They got our stuff and it sounds like they asked in the RFMI for us, for the applicant to address all of our concerns.
Oh,
And
misread it.
Okay. Which, nice, but Barbara, you want to say some stuff about kind of what that means and how we should do that in the future?
Yeah, I mean, had been suggested, I think Kate had come up, or Peter had come up with the idea of doing the letter, and I kind of confirmed that that would be a really good way to go, and not that we've always done that necessarily, and it does seem like it was effective where, and I think it was really well thought out by everybody, you know, to kind of address the things that DES has to address. And, you know, they picked up on a lot of those kind of technical things about, you know, in the application and, you know, the height and stuff like that. They know in their rules, but they also were very responsive to our comments, not as much as they could. I mean, I have a feeling still something's gonna probably happen, but it just was sort of a good way to get into the insight of the person that was doing the permitting and how they would respond to that. Everybody's different. I feel like it's worth everybody's time to think about it.
And to me, it's I think there's one thing on the, looking at the
Regulations and review of it is the talk about docks. Because we don't regulate the docks ourselves. That reinforces that. That's it. Okay.
I'll very quickly, because we don't have much time, say that I passed out a postcard and a guidance document to everybody that Lynn so graciously helped create as part of a project with the advanced postal program. I don't know if you want to give a 30-second luncheon. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. No, COVID. Super fun. Thanks for the time. Yeah, so it's meant to be a resource that's one more reference that we can use to help promote, good stewardship along our coasts with a special focus on salt marshes. And just thinking, salt marshes are such a unique habitat that I feel like sometimes people don't realize just how fragile the soils and the plants are. So it's like trying to sort of use some of the salt marsh ecology as another reason and sort of an extra sort of kind of message around how to be careful. And then also to just be really specific about what that means. So dock storage and boat storage and dogs, and some of the stuff that people don't think about and I've heard come up in these meetings. And so it lives on the DES's website, so hopefully it'll feel like a kind of authoritative kind of reference. And one more thing that we could kind of give to applicants. Link to it on the Conservation Commission webpage, and we could even just have like a little stack of postcards that we like give to applicants when they come in. I feel like the prime moment to kind of convey some of these ideas to people. We do it already, but this is just meant to be kind of one more thing to be able to kind of tell that story in an even more compelling way, and also hopefully kind of align messages like with the other coastal towns around New Hampshire.
I love the illustration.
So good.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that
Right? Yeah.
trying to get it to other people, we want to distribute them. I don't know if you guys have tried to get them to schools at all, but thought it'd be good to get them to, there's this teacher in the middle school who's pretty active, and then the teacher in the high school who the city manager just sent an email to, introduced us to, that we'll get her some copies and see if there's other people in the high school that might be good, so
I hadn't
get
even
the
thought
kids
of
involved, yeah.
that. Especially because there's multiple schools, right, that are adjacent to tidal waters.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a prime
Yeah.
opportunity to.
Sure, that, we
Yeah.
elementary school too, I guess.
Yeah.
It's really nice how like in the second picture, like it looks better. Like I like that's awesome.
It's like the guy kind of relaxing. On the floor.
It just looks way better.
Mow less, you can relax more. Yeah, and the woman who did the illustrations, I mean, she's just so thoughtful. Like, to see like the dog chasing the bird, like bring the wildlife. Like, she just had this like real detailed approach. And also, this is obviously like a publicly funded project, so all the imagery is just available. If somebody did have like a PowerPoint and you want to grab an image, a couple people are using some images on signs. Different kind of restoration sites around the seacoast. There's quite a bit more online too, like little illustrations to go with each of those benefits that we talk about that are part of what a wetland provides to people. Yeah.
I think the at least first thing that we'll probably do for outreach with this is kind of similar to the wetland update. We're going to send postcards to the salt marsh property in Christiantown, which there aren't too many of them, so it's a lot easier than what we did last year with the wetland map update. So those will all get sent out hopefully soon. But yeah, it's great for just putting on your fridge. It's aesthetically pleasing to have.
One more product we could bring to the sustainability fair. We do that. Yeah. If you guys are doing other events, want to staff in the postcards or whatever, we have those. Kate has the ones. Yeah, I got the Portsmouth City seal on them. Well, thanks again to that. It's awesome.
Okay, so the big thing we're talking about tonight is potential updates to Article 10. Hopefully some of you kind of went through it and thought of things that maybe you would like to see changed, maybe you have trouble with, everyone don't quite understand, or like, and you don't want change. So there's a lot of ways we could kind of go through this, but I figure we kind of just go through what the commission already worked on 2 years ago, which is the red line version. And then as we're going through, if people had specific thoughts on the red line version, if it's still what we want, if you're kind of nervous about some of the changes, or if you think we missed something big, then maybe just shout it out. And if we have time at the end, we can kind of go through some of the things that Peter and I talked about and wanted to bring up. But I think tonight, just kind of getting like a draft list of any possible changes we want to make or ideas to try to incorporate. And then hopefully next month, at that meeting, we can have more time to really finalize, dig into stuff. Maybe March or April, meet with the planning board to talk things out. And then one thing I'll just say before we dive in is that when Peter and I were looking at potential staff edits, two things that we really focused on when we started thinking about things was what is this gonna mean for enforcement, for staff and for the commission? Like, how, is this gonna make enforcement harder? Is it gonna be impossible to enforce? Is it gonna make enforcement easier? And then another thing was, I'm trying to remember what it was. Enforcement. And now I remember halfway through us doing this, but at least keep enforcement in mind and maybe just, oh, I was gonna think of scenarios. So every time you kind of are looking at an edit or proposing an edit, would this work in every scenario? Would it be really burdensome to a residential property owner versus commercial? Or is it burdensome to everybody? Is it decreasing burden? Kind of where's the equity in our decision there at idea? So, all right, start off just going through the first page. First page is really explanatory. I don't think when we were first doing this, we had any big ideas for this other than just to start thinking about climate change, which we already do in all of our discussions. So this is kind of just cementing it in kind of our practices by listing it in the welcome section or the environmental protection section. It's not completely like something that is part of our, like, it's not a requirement in our wetland permit applications that can consider climate change or address climate change. But I think originally we just thought about making sure we at least say something so that people are thinking about the carbon impacts of wetlands and, you know, flood storage, all that stuff. I don't know how people feel about adding this kind of sort of ideology to our.
Personally, I absolutely think we should. I mean, we have a city climate action plan, right? Which is sort of when we get to some of those spots that I thought about is like, how much can we lean into that plan and how much can we, you know, ask applicants to provide information about? That's still a few pages down the road, but I think our job is to protect our wetlands. We can't ignore climate change. It has to be part of our work.
Did anybody else have any changes to this page or updates? So the second page of this section talks about our jurisdictional areas. I might have had an edit for this, but we can talk about it at the end. But I don't think there's too much we can change here in terms of, you know, our jurisdictional waterways. And we do have definitions of wetlands, which I think in the past we've intentionally kept pretty open-ended. But it's allowed us to include man-made wetlands, like stormwater structures, and which is a created wetland. And one thing that Peter and I talked about is also trying to rope in connected wetlands. So sometimes we'll see like the edge of a marsh or a tidal wetland, and there's a nearby freshwater wetland that feeds into that tidal wetland. And a lot of times, wetland scientists don't put those together as one jurisdictional area for a wetland size. And it's something we always have considered, but we haven't enforced it because it's not in the ordinance. So it's something.
We have enforced it, but it's not as clear as it could be. I guess that's the problem. Is
Like why?
be more clear.
That's something that we were considering adding to the definition of a wetland. So something along the lines of the connection between freshwater and tidal wetlands shall be considered one resource for the purpose of assessing jurisdictional sizes. So to put that either in the definition or in the jurisdictional area. ordinance.
Do you need to specify freshwater and tidal, or could it just be connections between wetlands?
Yeah,
Freshwater.
that's the point.
There are situations where there's
It's like a brackish and freshwater. Yeah.
little wetland units that are, we know they're connected, but might be treating them as separate things.
Yeah, where the problem comes in sometimes is there'll be a freshwater wetland up above the salt marsh area. And people are like, well, that's not part of the salt marsh, so it's less than 10,000 square feet, but it's contiguous with the salt marsh. And so trying to connect those two is what that, but I think that's good. You can keep it broader and keep the connection in there with freshwater salt marsh, but then maybe make it broader. Say all wetlands.
Because then you can include stuff that's connected underground by like culverts. Drainage.
Yeah.
Like, we want the bypass.
And I feel like that's happened with some of our second applications, like, oh, that wetland across the street, even though so much of what they're doing.
Put a street through it.
Right, yeah, but I feel like they try to use the road as
100%.
You know, like, we don't really impact that wetland.
Yeah. Yeah, because we do ask applicants to, on their application, say, what is the wetland size of the jurisdictional wetland that you're impacting? And they often do that one, but for the Sagamore case, it's that one on site that's also connected to that huge conservation piece. So it's what's gonna be impacted by your application, not what is right next to your project. Yeah. That's an idea that we have.
Worth mentioning.
I was gonna ask a question too, and you guys would know better on the wording, but should it say, I mean, if you want to change the wording? An existing connection between freshwater? Or does it matter? Connection? Depends on the context, but it sounds like making a connection.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yep, that's a good clarification.
Yeah, I also had a question about on that second page under 10. 1.4, the created wetland. Does that ever run into any problems as far as should it say the created or man-made wetland? Because we've had so many applicants come in here, especially lawyers, talk about that it's a man-made wetland. And I know it's the same thing as a created wetland, but it's almost like they're using that little wording to make more of a point. I don't know. You guys see that?
Trying to remember what the definition says.
Yeah, so you just leave it at that.
It doesn't say man-made, it says an area that has been transformed from upland to wetland, where the upland was not created by human activity such as by filling or water. So we could add something. Either we could add or man-made to this definition, or just right after.
I would do the definition if you're gonna do it
I feel like we took man-made out of there
for a reason.
specifically for a reason.
Yeah, you might.
One particular case, yeah.
Okay.
But we'll have to look at like how we can use it there, because we don't want to exempt them, right? So.
No.
So
Agree.
if we
And I agree with
include that,
Barbara.
include all wetlands.
I definitely have experience dismissive about it if it's man-made.
Well, it doesn't matter because it's,
You know, they can't.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's been a thing we've tried, or at least I've tried to impress for the years. Some, like Pease has different buffers based on the quality of the wetland. But we've always said, well, 100-foot buffer means that all wetlands get kind of treated the same, and some low-quality wetlands might get better because they have a 100-foot buffer, where if you just give them a 25-foot buffer, then doesn't have any chance of getting better. So same with man-made wetlands, just because they're man-made wetlands. And what is,
What is
it's probably just exposing groundwater that would have been a wetland anyway.
Still an area in there, but. Okay, so consider adding and man-made to
That
that.
would be our research when they got you had.
Figure out if that's gonna be, yeah, why we changed it. Yeah.
So back in 2023, one of the big things that we changed that was part of these corrections or edits was the vegetative buffer strip. We wanted to redefine it as both the no cut and the vegetative buffer strip, because that's verbiage that we always use during meetings. I think that was the reason for that. To add that no cut / vegetative buffer strip every time we mentioned that section in here. And that leads into the kind of the bigger edits, which is change in distances of those buffers, which is later on. But I think this is one we can be redlined a couple times. One to change the menu. I don't think it was too controversial back when we first talked about it, adding the no cut. But it does just make it longer and more wordier. Or
Could just be no cut off.
or just no cut, yeah.
I like that. I think it is much more clear. Well,
To get rid of vegetative.
well, or to include no cut. I think
Oh,
might have
to- yeah. To page 4. So this is one that I think staff brought up last time we went through this. We were seeing, I was seeing back in 22 and 2023, a lot of applications come in for generators in the wetland buffer and people installing new generators like alongside their house. And back then we had a restriction, or we had an exemption where you could put in a generator as long as the mounting pad was less than 10 square feet. But all the standard size generators now come with a prefab pad and they all exceed 10 square feet. So like nobody was able to meet this dimension. So we talked about increasing it just a little bit to 12 square feet. I think most of the standard sizes are like 11.1 square feet for generators that do residential homes. That was just kind of help out a lot of people that wanted their generators. So now page 5, we kind of get into the application requirements. And back then we wanted to require a planting plan, which really is only triggered now with an enhancement plan if there's excess impervious surface, but we always end up asking for one anyways, and they always provide it. So I think just might as well make it a requirement because it's so important. Especially for vegetative buffer strip to have that details.
Where I had some things and kind of leaned into, our climate action plan a little bit, and I appreciate your comments about burden on applicants, and so I don't know, maybe there's like some well, first of all, I'm not sure if some of the things that I was thinking about were in our purview. They feel like it to me in a broader sense, but I don't know how other commissioners will feel. That said, I don't know, maybe there needs to be some guardrails about requiring these things based on size of the project. To help manage some of that burden, depending on who's doing it. But some of the things that I thought about were like, demonstrating or showing low impact development design, because that's part of our climate action plan. And some of the things that came up for me were like, are you going to be using renewable energies? Like, what are building materials, insulation values, like things like that to show efficiency and how you're using resources to construct and maintain this property. There's also a bit in one of our strategies in the climate action plan is identifying public and private property that are subject to sea level rise and potential adaptation measures. So like, is that something that's been considered in the project or not? Maybe kind of have some of these conversations already with applicants, but I don't know if it's standard or all the time. Those were some other potential requirements or things that I just thought like maybe we should, I ask those questions sometimes. But I don't know what other commissioners think about some of that stuff. Or how staff feel about asking that to be part of the application.
Like the sea level rise kind of requirement, especially because when we had that one that triggers if you're in a tidal buffer to do a living shoreline, present the living shoreline project. That kind of goes along with it, or it can be a separate one, is if within this tidal buffer. Show maybe the floodplain or the topography of your plot and demonstrate how you're trying to mitigate impacts from sea level rise. Or applicant should make a good faith effort to kind of demonstrate how to. Yeah.
The other one's hard, the LAD one's hard. Because do we want to give them credit for? They're like, oh, yeah. You know, the purpose for them explaining what they're doing, and if they are doing something, does that mean that counts towards, because it's not really part of the regulation, so how do we incorporate that in?
That might be a good thing to do, like as a sort of at the beginning of the ordinance, the purpose or the intent. What we're trying to achieve, and then people might get a sense that wetland protection can help with climate change mitigation and things like that. It does get hard to ask people to do things, A, that they don't understand, or B, they don't understand how it relates to their permit. Even if they understand what climate change is about, they might not be able to make the leap that there's protection. I think to Barbara's point, it's hard to give them credit for it, even if they're doing a ton.
Yeah.
Because they're still full of wetlands that they're trying to get relief from. But maybe they're doing it are you saying they're doing it a better way than their neighbor who's not giving you their climate change rationale, but they're
Well,
less wetland?
yeah, and I struggled with some of it too, because again, some of that came with some of the bigger projects. And I feel like they should have more responsibility, but then to Barbara's point, if they say they're doing all those things, like,
Yeah.
what is that? We still don't necessarily like the project, like, so I do recognize that's sort of a complicated thing, but I also feel like if there was some way we could incorporate it just to make applicants at least thinking about it,
Yeah.
and so that it's on, they know it's on our radar and it should be on their radar when they're developing, and maybe we're not the board or commission to just manage that, but,
That would fit more in the purpose section. This is why these things are important, a little description or education. But I mean, I think we could try it. I guess we try it in the site review regs. It has to deal with them a lot where we say, show us your green building components,
yeah.
we don't require anything. So Kate's like pulling teeth because they never provide it, then she has to go ask for it. And then, so I just don't want to set us up for something that we're not gonna get.
Yeah.
Or that we're gonna have to fight for. But if it's in the purpose statement, then when they read through the ordinance on how the people that do pay attention to the whole part of it, they might get educated a little bit. But if there's specific things that could tie directly, like sea level rise might have some direct connections on how they do their project.
And it's like,
We do have this climate action plan, right? And lots of new development going in. What is the mechanism for encouraging energy efficiency in those big new developments? Is that something that comes up at the planning board? Do they have, I mean, I guess I'm just sort of naive to like the universe of other ordinances.
It'd be a commercial project that has to go through site review or a bigger residential development. And there's not a lot, we have the, show us what your green building, techniques are with your project, but no requirement. And I don't know that we can have a requirement at the state law level. But there's more we can do to require or incentivize, there will be a way that we could say, if you do this, then you get, a bigger footprint or you get more floors up here. That's what we try to do with housing. To the extent people take advantage of it, but yeah. So where the law doesn't allow us to do it as a requirement, we can do it as an incentive. So if there's ways to do it as an incentive, then that's something to think about.
yeah. Yeah, that's the struggle. They're kind of already listed as incentives with the enhancement plan requirement. I think the MPs or the impact designs are listed as like one of the examples of things you can put in your enhancement plan to help offset this.
That would be just stormwater law.
Maybe we also consider design components. Solar, video.
Take out the, like you said, for the incentive meeting,
Like far-fetched, but rid of the whole community space thing or whatever and put that in instead. I don't know, like another one in addition to community space or whatever. But
Well, they did in places, they required both community space and workplace housing for the incentive work, because everybody was just taking advantage of community space.
right,
They-
could you add the LAB,
I think you could do
Energy.
an LID incentive, you know, if you do a LEED silver building or something like that.
Yeah.
Get some incentive.
Like the
because the other ones kind of there. You know, on the community space and people putting trails and buffers and stuff like that, they, you know. So it would be nice to have that option.
Yeah. That's something we talked to the planning board about. Not really, I mean, doable, just gotta get the support.
Actually, we missed one on a before this, that I'm gonna jump back to real quick, but it goes with all the applications that we looked at today. So one page back under permitted uses, 10.10.16.10.1 lists some of the permitted uses, and one thing that is permitted right now is routine maintenance for dredging and swale, but it's not very obviously said here. So, we were thinking where in that first paragraph of one, after will not alter the natural surface configuration by the addition of fill or by dredging, with the exception of routine dredging maintenance within a previously permitted drainage swale. So I think that kind of just clears up that you can do maintenance dredging on something that was previously permitted or has been historically maintained as a drainage swale and needs to be dredged and cleaned up every now and again. But this wouldn't permit new swales from being dredged or new areas from being dredged, which would obviously trigger permit. So there's that one. That's just the addition of a couple words in that first paragraph. Redlined it yet. See that next one.
do you want time limits or anything on?
Oh, on how long it's
Hasn't been maintained? I know DES has like, you know, if they leave it for a certain amount of time and everything's grown back and they haven't maintained it, so it hasn't been functioning for a long time.
comes in for a new permit.
Yeah, they have to come in for a permit.
That's an interesting idea. I don't know what number to pick though for that, like I don't have the expertise. When you renaturalize and kind of overgrow and. But what would, do you know what DES's time period is?
No, but I can find out.
Yeah, so maybe we can look that up next time you can see if it's worth adding in.
Sorry, guys, I have to go to a budget meeting, so good luck with it.
Yeah,
Probably continue. Hope I can participate more. See you guys, take care. See you.
All right. Back. Just, anybody have any other things on this fifth page? The permit which is our additional. Additional, so 10, 17.
We have a list of recommended species, and I think speaking.
We do on the website of native species for Vermont, Maine. Some of them are specific to wetlands, wetland buffers, but I don't think some are just native. of The region. That's something that, Andrew was looking on. At least the marsh, but didn't talking to me, wasn't it, a marsh, the marsh buffer. Meadow buffer. Yeah. There's a lot of resources, especially in Massachusetts, like the state government, there's a lot of, mental guides and things like that. That's like the first thing that pops up in search of really good buffer plans, which is the guidance. But guidance for people.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a requirement, you place the hand something off the bat, say, hey, this is what we see as a recommendation.
Even just people have questions too, but like the level of specificity, then we want, yeah. Then we ask for a lot, like there's the trees that be tall. Nice to be subjective on like huge projects, so we can like, details, like exact location, I think so is. Residential projects. What planting where, instead of like what counts as buffering, like how many. That's just like, have them read that requirement. What do you think, and we just send it a list. Right now, we're pointing to the original one, that's specific to buffers. This is what I typically want, it's like, just generally what the type of plant, you know, like, woody or non-woody. Annual or perennial, you know, like just sort of like generally what types of plants, and then for the head site, for the planting plan, and then, you know, alongside could be like a list of species, but. Tree trees, we'll put in all these places where I said I'm gonna plant a tree in one of these three species, you know, like. As opposed to like,
Yeah, this is gonna be a dogwood and this is gonna be.
you know, like that you would have a landscape designer do.
It's like we were put on some Riley Moore. For planting resources. I think we could a dedicated page on the website instead of just look at me now. That website. Oh, sorry.
It's because I got my hearing aids and there's so much
I
background.
think it's this thing, it's so loud, it's really like,
You shut it off?
or we could like, can we like just all sit on that side of the room?
Yeah.
But yeah, we could turn it off, don't change.
There's that. Turn it off.
It's like.
I haven't worn like a tank top in months, but you know, this room is providing that opportunity.
6.
But set 68, which makes no sense. So if you want to pop a window.
Well, if we do that, won't it just kick on though?
Yeah, but there's really no. Why it's popping out if it's set 68.
Maybe the floors is like, don't they usually better for me?
But I'll try to talk louder. Sorry about that. But yeah, if you want to, feel free to. But yeah, I think that would be great. It's on the website right now. There's just like a link on the sidebar of the homepage that says like New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and plant species list. And it's just a link to the website. But if we had like a tab on the website that was like, I'm working on it, just like planting guides, which is upcoming, but with our grant project, but also it'd be great to have earlier, just at least. Less. We put together a bunch of sources all in one place.
A co-op extension have a list.
Do they have a specific like buffer one?
Eh,
Something I can look into it more and get a file list. Okay, just to jump through this a little bit more, there was also something at the bottom of this page that I think Peter and I are thinking of adding, and it's in the 10.17.24. With the wetland buffer enhancement plan on our end when we're accepting applications. And I think when they're even coming to the commission, a lot of times people, applicants just don't even realize that the wetland buffer enhancement plan is required, or they do think it's required for every single application, but it's really only when it triggers that then impact of impervious surface. So I was just very simply thinking of adding the word if required to 10.17.25 at the very beginning. Just because 10.17.24 says if you can't remove impervious surface to make it net zero, then you have to do a buffer enhancement plan. And then the next section says the wetland buffer enhancement plan will be this. But it should probably be, if required, a wetland buffer enhancement plan will have this. Just to really bang it into there. Yeah. It's not always required.
yes.
So,
You gotta connect it too, 'cause it's sort of like just hanging out there.
yeah.
Like, and this is what it is.
Um, okay, let's jump to the next page. There we have a couple additions. Back in 2023 where we talked about,
Sorry.
yes,
To go back.
Yep.
In that same thing, it says the intent of this provision is that the project will not result in a net loss of pervious. Oh, and that pervious, never mind.
obvious, yeah.
Like getting lost in the impervious, pervious, so yeah, okay.
That reminded me also in this section, 10.17.25, where it describes what the wetland buffer enhancement plan should be. Maybe we include, in that 10.17.25.1, the wetland buffer enhancement plan shall include combination of plantings, invasive species removal, habitat creation areas, all that. And, low impact design elements if applicable. That's maybe where we add that in.
Or, adaptation measures for sea level rise.
Yeah. We did. Then on that same page, we added 10.17.27 and 0.28 back in 2023. Wanted to include wildlife corridors, habitat protection measures. We're doing a lot more stipulations around those kind of subjects back then. And light and noise pollution. City, for at least commercial and bigger residential projects, requires dark skylighting already, but for the smaller residential projects, we don't really have lighting requirements. So that's something I think they're thinking about back then. Yes, but I mean, those two both say they start with where feasible, so it's not a hard and fast requirement, but if someone, an applicant comes and they don't present a wildlife corridor, but we know that that's a main according to the wildlife action plan maps, then maybe that's on us to really say, no, this is actually feasible according to blah, blah, blah. So we're gonna require this certain thing. So I think that's where we can kind of choose these objective. Okay. And moving on, nothing else on this page. So for conditional use approval. So this section has kind of criteria that will or will not guarantee an approval, or I guess will not guarantee an approval. And we've been seeing this in the last few years too, not just in 2023, but people coming and saying, you know, we don't want to encroach on the setback and go get a variance. So this is kind of the only place we have to put the structure or where we can have these impacts. And I think we wanted to really solidify with applicants that we don't care about setbacks, we care about the buffer. And so approval for this permit will have nothing to do with constraints on setbacks and different things that are your arguments for why you need to impact it. So this one includes other property constraints such as setbacks, view corridors. There's not many enforcement. There's a couple that we've seen that are all along the water. Utility easements, et cetera, are not justification for bringing to site a project or portion of a project within the wetland buffer.
We should specify the project, a property line setback, just because that term setback is used for. Wetland too.
So either the word property or property line setback.
Or whatever the right. You know, like front setback, the back setback.
Yeah, you're right, because you could argue what other setback. Maybe even adding in other property line setbacks.
Well, I'm wondering if that like, does that still cover like, say, like I guess that would cover the setback from the street if that's what it's trying to beat, like the 10-foot setback from the edge of someone else's property, or I guess it does work.
Building setbacks. In the factory home, we have apartment. Be away from each other. That's like true. Property and the property.
Yeah, maybe property.
Or just property setbacks, like in general, and then we can interpret it as, you know, we need property lines, we need buildings. Or zoning setbacks.
Yeah, I also wonder, I don't know, like. These are just examples, right? And there's an et cetera, so this is not the define.
Yeah.
So,
That's it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Could say or other existing constraints.
Instead of considering. It's awesome.
What are we trying to change about it from right now? I just.
have anything. So they'll often, that will be sort of one of their,
No, I just mean like from what we have in red currently, what is the proposed change that we're making and why?
So I think it just changed around a bit. So before it was to put something in front of the word setbacks, just to clarify exactly what kind of setback we're talking about. But I think with
Well, go ahead.
I think with Oliver's change, instead of, we'll just keep it as is, but cross out, et cetera, and put or other existing constraints. Just cover everything.
Okay. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think if someone comes in and argues that, you know, this allows them to. Why would they need a wetland? Then if they don't have to abide by wetland setbacks, we'll say, no, that's not the purpose or the intent of this. It also doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Never mind.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think this will kind of eliminate, or we can point to it no matter what, how we change the wording?
Yeah.
Of the, well,
Yeah,
the
either
setback from the road says that I need to be 50 feet. And so that means I have to be in this location.
Just a couple other stuff at the bottom of this page. Our criteria for. So we've been working with the same 6 criteria for approval. Probably see it in the staff memo the most, but applicants are sort of supposed to argue their reason for needing an application through these criteria, which they don't always do. But this is kind of what guides our final vote and how we view a project. But back in 2023, couple of edits. So to the 4th criteria, which is really all about applicants should really try to maintain the existing natural state as much as possible and only change it to the extent necessary to achieve construction goals. And I think we just wanted to add on that, you know, anything that will be removed in terms of vegetation will be replaced in kind. And really specify that it needs to be the same distance where vegetation was removed, so it's in the same kind of location and not somewhere else on site that's really could help with buffer filtration or anything like that.
I could put a sort of asterisk next to that. I just was wondering if that kind of goes along with what Rick was looking for, right? Yeah.
I would think so, because this one's pretty open-ended, because, I mean, I think that someone can come in and argue that, you know, in order to build 3 homes on this lot, they actually have to cut down all the trees because they had to bring in equipment on this side and this side and this side. Obviously, that never happens because it's egregious. But just clearing that up kind of helps guide their application too. I don't know if this language is pretty specific, so much so that it might even just be worth putting in the application requirements section instead.
Yeah, that's right. I made a note, should just go somewhere else.
Gives them,
And here, doesn't it kind of give them ammunition to cut a tree down? Because they'll just replace it. And put it here.
Right. I think, yeah, giving us kind of that subjective ability to say, for them to come to the meeting and suggest a couple trees, and we say, you can't do any trees. In fact, you can plant. I think that's kind of where we. Good point.
but I don't know. I'm just playing, that's what I was saying. Mark next to it.
Other statements.
Bring it along here. This idea could be put either with the enhancement plan kind of details or with the planting plan requirements. Either. Maybe for next month, I'll take this out of here, put it in one or both of those, see. We can just remove it.
Are we purposely leaving vague or undelineated the spacing of the wetland markers? Cause like, we always kind of revert to, we have that discussion a lot, like, is it 30, is it 50? And I know we've like asked for different things for different properties.
Yeah, every time. Last year was 50, but before that we did 25 for a while on red.
Huh,
Especially if they have to purchase them. It's
Yeah.
me. The versus 25 double.
Yeah.
I think keeping it arbitrary is not so benefit. It's also relatively long,
That's what I was thinking.
you know.
Or to define it distance depending on.
Residents might just need one, right? Like right in the middle, in the backyard.
Like the hospital versus
Right.
house. The
Yeah.
hospital needs a handful, but a house needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, maybe one, yeah. And it's usually not that big of a sticking point to get them to do
No.
every 50 feet or 30 feet. So as long as it doesn't matter that we're doing that on a case by case basis, then I think it works the way it is.
And I think it's also depending on like the topography, right? If there's a big tree, they can stick it right on the tree, or if there's a garden, they can tuck it on the stake. So it kind of like
Works.
saves a little bit of flexibility needed, depending.
They don't want to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next, not on there. We don't talk about that nearly as much.
No, I was thinking, but it's still being in there.
I crossed it out just because we stopped kind of bringing it up, but something that we don't want to bring up or even just put NOFA or equivalent, just because NOFA might be falling, or not everybody might be NOFA qualified or.
Also just like a little confusing because there are, you mentioned fertilizer and other places in the ordinance. They're why. Look that. Where they fertilizer. This is actually insulted.
Maybe in that section.
Yeah. Yeah, there's already fertilizers and pesticides. Already. Like. And you do actually add it here, the compliance with the standards.
Maybe we only need it in that one spot.
It's been a while since I've looked at the NOFA guidelines, but I remember there being like 31 of them, and I don't think it just being around fertilizer, right? It was also just like frequency of cutting and some of those other things about how you care for your lawn. So I do appreciate the point that it's getting confusing, but it feels like we might lose some of those other pieces for people to think about how they're caring for their lawn besides just the fertilizer part.
Go back and look at them again.
You guys mentioned it a few times in here. I guess it's just I'm thinking of is that there's not a good way to enforce it. In the follow-up. But it can be like it's in the fertilizer section as must be in compliance. But if there's a section that is really just like ideology of wetland protection, like the purpose is purpose is pretty big too, or kind of big picture. So it wouldn't make sense to put no standards in the purpose section. But number 8 of the purpose section is to require the use of best management practices in low impact development and adjacent to wetland areas. I think no one falls under that. But
And maybe there's just another place that needs to go.
yeah. Well, we put it under the planting plan requirement. By planting plan and detailing species, proposed locations. Plan shall also include notes on how project or plan shall demonstrate how project follows NOFA standards.
Right, refreshing about NOFA because they talk a lot about organic agriculture, right, and regenerative practices, which some of that's not.
I like different opinions about this too. Any conflict extension, for example. Would argue that organic stuff can have just as big of an impact on water quality as like. That extent, and maybe it have to be like slow release is actually more useful. Specification. The organic.
And to know. This is page 8. We didn't really change anything in here except we start to talk about the distances for buffers. Limited cut area, which is now from 150 feet. Wanted back then to change that from 50 to 100 feet. And but the vegetative buffer strip from 0 to 50 feet. It's a huge change, which. Started thinking about it again the other day and all the impacts that would have. So basically, we went forward with that change. That would mean that in the vegetative buffer strip, you couldn't mow first 50 feet. It's the wetland. Which I think a lot of properties right now are either right up against wetlands or right up against their 25-foot no cut buffers. So that will impact a whole slew of property. And the limited cut area would be changed from 50 to 100 feet. So basically, there would always be cutting restrictions throughout the 100-foot buffer. First 50 feet would be no cut. And the last 50 feet would be cut 50% of trees less than 6-inch DBH. So, yeah, I don't know how we still feel about that. I
Is
think
it weird to like not hold people accountable for this if they're not doing a project, but that like if they're coming for, I don't know how to,
yeah, it's like mowing.
cause like, I know we're not going, no one's going around and saying like, hey, I mean, maybe you are sometimes, but like how much? Like no one has time for that, but like it just feels different to me if someone, I mean, I don't know, if someone's just, they're mowing, it is too bad, but they are living in their house and it's not, they're not trying to build inside the buffer. Whereas if someone or some entity is trying to really make significant changes, then like, to me, that should trigger a more intense need for a maintenance plan that's maybe more robust. I don't know if that's really fair. That's just how I viewed it.
That's what my thought too, but you're right, maybe it's not fair.
But it kind of feels fair, like the person that's not making as many impacts in the buffer maybe has a privilege of using more lawn. I mean, we don't want it within the 25, especially. I don't think we'd want to peel that part back, but
Trying to.
Yeah, we could even add a trigger like that into the next section, which, or next section, but a couple sections down. Where, it's one too. Because when we have like streams with steep banks right now, we increase the vegetative buffer strip from 25 to 40 feet. And maybe we could do a trigger right in, a second trigger in there where if you're proposing, a net increase in impervious buffer increases, the vegetative buffer strip increases from 25 to 50. That might.
that makes sense to me, but
Certainly better than. changing or from
Changing it for everybody.
now. I think it's excessive in some.
I'm trying to think, so the hospital project. That was an increase in impervious. But they don't have first 50 feet, they don't even have the first 25 feet available to vegetate because of that drive aisle. That's like one of those situations. Where how would we enforce that? Or would we let there be a waiver if you could offsets or create a 50-foot buffer somewhere else on the property?
What about new construction too?
Yeah, construction. Yeah, because that's all, yeah.
We get pushback. I mean, this idea, this concept of going from 25 to 50. But did we get pushback on? Like, that's something that.
Because I think we never really made it far past planning board. We met with the planning board with our work session. They didn't really have much feedback for us then when we had that work session. And it didn't go past that. I'm not sure how they feel about that.
Do you think they like looked at it critically enough to react or like understand what it meant? Not that that's our like job to do, but
This would be a big change. The thing I'm thinking about is maybe in the enhancement plan section. We had another like comma after low impact development operations and being a dedicated unload area and sort of vegetated buffers. Pretty required is I just don't know how. Seems like it'll be difficult to get a 0 to 50-foot no cut area. Whereas now we're just barely getting everybody to start to comply with 0 to 25. At least try. So, but
I do like the idea of it being part of the enhancement plan. That seems to, you're gonna have more of an impact. I mean, wouldn't it though, actually, like making this change, wouldn't it actually incentivize folks to not create larger structure and development within the buffer?
If they had to set aside.
Yeah. Like it might make them reconsider that plan and maybe build in a different way or a more creative way. So I feel like part of what, I mean, not, it's clear that part of this ordinance is saying that people should be looking for the most creative and effective way to avoid the buffer. But often they're not doing that. Often there are other things that they pull out to say, well, we want to avoid this and this. And then they also want to keep their lawn. But I feel like it's a privilege to own one of those properties. And so when you're buying that, you might need to realize that you can't expand into a 5-bedroom house and then you might need to stay 2 forever. And like, that's kind of, I don't know.
I think the other thing I want to be able to do is, and I don't know the mechanism, but like there's like so many different tiers of projects that we see, but there's like new construction versus redevelopment. And there's different standards, for example. And I think for us, the projects that it's a huge investment, like the Christmas tree farm, for example, just a bunch of them. They're like, well, it's existing impervious, therefore didn't trigger any kind of buffer enhancement for that project, it's a huge investment. So I don't know if there's like way to specify big projects versus small projects. Significant redevelopment projects and significant new development projects, the expectations of the people buffer.
what footage like triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it, I'm just thinking out loud, but like, would it be fair if it's a commercial project to have different stipulations, like if it's over 5 units?
That's not zoning, meaning. Specific time name. I'm just trying to like
Yeah.
sniff out the legal
Yeah.
ramifications, like As someone who's oftentimes like, I'm on the other side reading these things. Like I start with things like that can be challenged.
Yeah.
There's enough money in this.
Yeah.
That's where it's kind of developers.
Yeah, and that's a good point because we've had projects in the past that we pushed our own requirements and past what we had them as, like for 815 Lafayette, we got them to stay completely out of the 50. Well, we had to, they revegetated the 0 to 50, but and then for 100 Durgan, they were originally gonna have a lot of stuff a lot closer to the wetland. And we pushed them out of the 25 and then mostly out of the 75. So I think the bigger projects are more willing to work with us and beyond our standards to get their permit.
Yeah.
Smaller projects, not so much.
That's
That took some significant effort though.
I know, it would have been nice if it had been laid out somehow.
Yeah.
Or just a little bit more explicitly. Yeah.
Do we really think though, like adding something like this, like a trigger like this with certain amounts of added impervious, do we really think that's an undue burden to a developer? Like they can still do their projects. Right? I mean,
No, this issue seems to be one of the most testy ones in these. And so I was thinking the same thing, Oliver, you mentioned. I think if you make it overly restrictive, you've got a lot of opportunity for people to file suit. I almost think it's better served. In principle, I agree. I almost think it's better to continue to work with it on a case by case basis. And, we were able to convince them with the proper give and take. And we were able to get there. But if you, I don't know, if you do some major substantial change where neighborhood houses don't get along, as much as we would like that, I think that'll get challenged.
Is it a good conversation to have with the planning board that are interested in this, but we don't know?
Yeah.
Yes,
Seems like it needs some guidance.
yeah.
May even need some guidance from the attorneys.
Well, I was thinking, yeah, somebody's.
yeah, def-
Yes.
You could ask Trevor
Yeah,
to
that'd be great.
weigh in on this.
But it does seem like a goal should be like making this set of recommendations, set of guidelines, easy to communicate, easy to understand. Even though part of me wants to like add more complications too, so like.
I'd rather that there be an incentive to do it than have it be overly restrictive. I'm going to get there, yeah.
I feel like the new development is its own category. New development and significant redevelopment. The expectation is you have a 50-foot no cut buffer. To me, that doesn't feel like too much fast. Like look at that 850 in Lafayette. Like 100 feet is actually not very big. Like it really is. Like, I don't think it's not like in the like the scientific recommendations are oftentimes like be over 100 feet if you're really trying to meet all of the ecological services you might want. Come
It
on.
does, that's a great point, because it does depend on how much overall space there is. Remember the couple of properties where there was almost no lawn, and we were pushing them to restrict that further, and I think that, I remember the individual even saying, I almost have no lawn now.
Yeah.
Which we probably, at least some of us would probably like for it to be all that way. But
Like, or what came up for me is we do use those impervious surface numbers a lot, and I feel like applicants use that as a way, like the street shop is a good example. Is there a way maybe that we need to consider some of our language just to talk about the broader impact and not just like the surface area, if that makes sense? Like I think about that one or Lafayette, like there was nothing, regardless of how much impervious surface there was, that was like an empty lot that wasn't really being used. There wasn't much traffic. And now, even though the impervious surface might be less or whatever, there's that wetland is gonna be taxed a whole lot more by all those people living out there now, right around it, right? As compared to whether how functional it was or not before. So is there a way to kind of bring that conversation into our ordinance a little bit more? It's not just about like how many feet of concrete and pavement you have. It's like more of the,
One of the application requirements right now is that you're supposed to list the temporary and permanent impacts, square footage impacts from the project. So temporary would be anything like excavation and like reseeding, or like
right.
construction vehicles, like disturbing an area. The permanent is the structure is impervious and.
But I don't think people, like, never really have the conversation about like traffic flow, right? Which I know is probably a little out of our purview, like that's a tech thing or whatever, but it's still like, you know, like human impact, that's definitely a factor to the wetland when we're thinking about these massive projects that are gonna really change what's happening along the edge of those resources, around those resources and things that is not often part of our conversation, but is a bit of what I hear, kind of like the undertone of what some of us are talking about right now.
It also kind of connects to the fact that like a single family homeowner, and I don't know, it's really complicated, especially with like how many units and all of that. Like I see how that could get really messy, but I also question like you're building 200 units where used to be a parking lot. The impacts on every other person in the city of Portsmouth are pretty high. And so you want to make sure that you're really doing that right so that the infrastructure is supported and so that the wetland can continue to support not just itself, but like also the people, because our community is impacted by the wetland. And so I feel like, I don't know if there's a way to like look at it from that lens or like talk about it from that angle, but like, it's not just like, oh, anti-development. It's like the impact that a single family homeowner has by using that 50-foot space is so much smaller than like a big 200 unit development.
One of the reasons I think we heard that the planning board chair is interested in talking about criteria for approval, 6 that we have, and maybe making them more subjective. But I think that falls under the third criteria. And it's so open now that we can use it to really justify saying no to a lot of things, is that there will be no adverse impact on the wetland functional values of the site or surrounding properties. So that's not just impervious impacts or surface impacts, that's like that the human footprint impacts, wildlife impacts, corridor impacts, traffic impacts, anything that really impacts the wetland and surrounding properties too, which is kind of cool that we have that budding tower. But I feel like that is maybe criteria or an argument point that we probably could use more to say, you know what, yeah, you're offsetting the square footage of impacts that you're adding to this project, but you're not completely offsetting all the impacts to the wetland. And so therefore we're requiring this. Like, I think this is a good argument point to use to increase what we ask.
Yeah, it's like as if you're looking at it on like a flat plane versus like you're also adding the y-axis with the other part, like how many other impacts are coming from like overtime use. And I don't know if I'm making sense by saying that. Yeah. Like not something you can just see on paper from like that flat plane.
Like, I think all of these criteria, and I know we've talked about this before, but we can actually use these criteria as just like, even though we go through all the requirements, and, you know, we want that net zero impact, we can use just, if one criteria isn't completely met, that's basis to deny something, or if not to deny, ask for more so that we think they can meet that. So I think having these all be kind of open-ended and subjective gives us a lot of like bargaining power. We definitely use, but could always do more. revisit the rest of it. Yeah, you gotta get going.
No, I'm not saying it for that reason.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. We will eventually, yeah. Do we have a timeline for? Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I definitely gotta talk about it, especially with Sam and hopefully Alice here, you know, Stuart. Next month. Next month, we'll probably talk about it again, just like this, same our meeting. Go over everything we already did in this big one. And come up with kind of a final version. And if we don't finish that up by next month, then maybe we either do yet another month with the whole commission, or we just get a working group together. People want to decide to just give a couple people power to finish the edits and then bring them back to a meeting with the planning board. But I think planning board wants to meet with us sooner rather than later to kind of see what we're talking about. And then I don't think they exactly have edits, but they just have conversations that they want to have about this. Maybe March or I think March or April meeting of the planning board.
Is it, could you kind of a give and take these things? I mean, because some of these things I'm afraid to ask anybody else, but at the same time.
I understand. Yeah, I completely understand that, especially with like the buffer distance thing. I don't want to bring up anything that's gonna scare them and make them, you know, worried that we're asking for too much. But at the same time, I think last time we had that meeting with them to talk about these original edits, they didn't give too much in terms of thoughts and ideas for changes. They really just absorbed a lot of what we had to say because I don't think they really thoroughly know Article 10 like we do and like all the requirements that we have for applications. So maybe this time they're coming more prepared, but I think we really need to narrow down our list of changes to kind of a existing list, but we also have to have a good reasons behind why we're doing the things we're doing and, you know, backing up like our reasons for it because we see this in applications or because we've had issues in the past with enforcement or requirements or maintaining buffers. I think it's just important that we all get on the same page about why it's so critical so that we can also convince them of why it's so critical. Because they're ultimately the ones that would recommend it to the city council for final approval.
I think we pick our balance and we limit it. And I'd also, I'm gonna say the same thing, and I'd also recommend not getting too detailed and spending too much time until and pick the ones where we really think it's important. And to your point, there's clear cases and such. Present that, see how they respond before we over invest, I guess is my thing. Right, like we already have one example where there was quite a bit of time put into it. I think you have more impact if you pick a few very key things and you hold a strong position and say, we'd really like to get these changed. And make it a long list of things that they have to think about. It's a lot more actionable if it's very crisp to your point. The rest, I mean, I agree with all the points, by the way. I just think handle it that way, and then everything else, you've got the ability to work on a case by case basis, even though, you know, it's not as easy or efficient. There's the ones that everybody keeps bringing up, right? It's the same issue over and over, and we feel it's pretty egregious, right? In overreach or what have you. Those are the ones that I'd say we want to prioritize. Just my own.
I kind of don't think we're gonna get that much pushback for a lot of these, though. I figure just like ask for it, and then if they have some they don't want, then great, let those go and like move forward with the things that are most important to us. But fair enough.
Should come to us with their dream of what they want to do with the property, and we end up probably with what they wanted to begin with. And they were just kind of bargaining with us.
Either way.
I think a lot of people in planning like appreciate this though, because I don't think they're what they're following isn't necessarily as strict in some ways as they'd want it to be. That's not across the board, but I think.
That's why for the commission input to
Yeah.
Another town's gonna miss this.
Mm.
So there's like 3 pages left. We don't have to finish this. We could go over again next month. It was just kind of the continuation of expanding the buffer sizes. A little note about including blasting, or including restrictions on blasting. Things we can talk about next month. We want to dive into master plan. We'll have 10 minutes.
I haven't stopped.
I should probably leave.
Yeah, I gotta.
That's fine. Oh,
You want to send me an email and I could just.
Sure.
Yep, and then I'll link it, survey. Yep. Okay. But conservation.
Yeah.
That's we're all gonna say.
Send, like a summary of what they kind of shared with us about that draft at our last meeting, all of you. Me whatever feedback.
So meeting adjourned? So if you turn that off. or-
Yeah. Can I turn that on?
Don't have Kevin.